Folks, we're in a series, and what Derek just did, talking about God the way He is, just reminds me that this series of overcoming, there is no greater overcomer than Jesus. He overcame everything for us. And so we're in this series, and it's called Overcoming. And today's message, I'm going to tell you, it's a whole lot easier to preach than last week's was. But I do trust that you took last week's message with the spirit with which it was intended. Today, we're going to talk about overcoming fear. And just last week, this past week, I received two things on my computer. One was this: fear has two meanings. Forget everything and run. That's me. Or face everything and rise. The choice is yours. And then I received this one. Fear is a reaction. Courage is a decision. Winston Churchill. I am absolutely amazed about how God works. How did He know I was preaching on fear this week? And that's what came to me this week. So I got to ask as we start, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? All of us are afraid of something. Maybe it's the fear of the unknown. Maybe the fear of dying. Not necessarily the fear of death, because we know what happens after that, but the fear of dying. We just don't know how it's going to happen. Maybe it's a fear of losing a job. Or maybe it's a fear of being alone. I've got a couple fears in my life I just want to share with you. One is acrophobia. Anybody know what that is? What is that? Fear of heights. If I go more than 2 steps up on a ladder, I'm done. I can't go any further. Now, I never used to have the fear of heights until I went out to the Ozarks and went rock climbing with a friend of mine. We were testing this out for the children to children's home. We were going to take them out there on a trip, and so we went out to do it first. And we got out there, and I got about 150 feet up in what they call a book, which is 2 rocks that kind of come together and you work your way up. I got about 150 feet up, and I had another 100 feet to go, and I froze right there. Now, that was back in the day when I was about half the man that I am now. And some guy that was 6'4", 320 pounds climbed up there to save me. Think about that for a moment. Acrophobia, scared to death of heights, no more than 2 steps on the ladder. Here's the other one I've got. It's an Ophidiophobia. Anybody know what that one is? Obviously I don't, because I can't even say it. It's the fear of snakes. I got to share, I just saw this yesterday. A friend of mine named Rick Cherok is a professor at Ozark. He showed me a picture, sent me a picture yesterday. Graduation, right? The students are getting ready to come into the gym and to sit, and he looks down from the stage and he sees a 4-foot copperhead snake where the kids are supposed to come in. I would not have graduated. I wouldn't have gone in that gym. I don't care what they did with it. But it's just fear of snakes. There's only really 4 kinds of snakes that I don't care for. Big ones, little ones, live ones, and dead ones. So it's not bad. There's just 4, but snakes. What I want to talk about today is fear. How do we overcome our fears? And primarily, I want to talk about how do we overcome the fears that keep us from being what God wants us to be and what God wants us to do. John chapter 20 and verse 19 says this: that Sunday evening, the disciples were meeting behind locked doors because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. The word afraid right there is phobos, which is obviously where we get our word phobia. And it means to be scared, terrified, dread, that which brings on terror. That's how these guys were feeling when they were locked in that room. That was a fear. But today, when we're talking about fear, here's the definition I want to use. It's a God-given emotion and reaction for the purpose of alerting, preserving, and preparing a person for an upcoming situation or problem. Quite the definition. Obviously, that didn't come from Webster. Bottom line, fear should help us prepare. Fear should help us prepare. Because listen, all fear is not bad, right? If I fear having a wreck on my motorcycle, what am I going to do? I'm going to put a helmet on, right? That's just what I'm going to do. If I fear I'm going to fail a test, then what am I going to do? I'm going to study. I'm going to be prepared. If I fear failing in my business, I'm going to work longer. I'm going to do what I have to do to make sure that business is a success. Back in my days at Kentucky Christian College, or now university, we had a professor by the name of Dr. Gemeinhardt. Dr. Gemeinhardt was a stickler. We'd have a quiz every weekend there. You didn't know which day of the week it was going to come, but there'd be a quiz every day of the week, so you better be prepared. This is the kind of guy that when you were talking about the 12 apostles, it was a capital A, and when you were talking about apostles in general, it was a small a. And if you didn't get that right, the red pen came through it. He was a stickler. The first thing he says when you go into his class is, nobody ever makes an A in my class. What happens when you tell somebody that? Well, what happens when you tell me that? Nobody. Watch this. I'm going to get an A in this class. And I did. Because I studied and studied and studied because I didn't want to fail in his class. That's one of the fears we have. There's another fear mentioned in the Bible, and it's associated with wisdom. With wisdom. Reverential fear is what some call it. Proverbs chapter 1 verse 7. Fear of the Lord is the foundation of true knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and hate discipline. Folks, it's a lack of this fear that allows people to take the Lord's name in vain. It allows them to not worship him the way that he wants to be worshiped. They don't honor Christ the way that he is to be honored. A reverential fear for God causes us to consider the judgment. Where do I stand with God? But I'm very glad there's grace. The fear we're talking about today, though, is the kind of fear that it's not good, and it keeps us from being all that God wants us to be. Now, there was a survey taken just 2 years ago, just prior to COVID, okay? 3 things that American public is afraid of. Number 1, the unknown. Number 2, disease. Imagine that after the COVID fear that has been placed in all of us. And the other one was judgment. Those are the 3 things that our culture is fearing. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at an Old Testament book. And we're going to see 2 great examples of overcoming fear. The book we're going to look at is the book of Esther. It's not one that we often spend a lot of time in. And if you look at the book of Esther and you read through the book of Esther, God's not mentioned in the book. He's not mentioned in that book. And yet we see his providential care all throughout it. You see, what we see in the beginning is God uses the sinful actions of King Xerxes and his wife Vashti to open up the door and to raise up a new queen, a little Jewish girl, Esther. You know, he uses Xerxes and Vashti here like he used Pharaoh back with Moses. He used him to accomplish his purpose. You see, it's a beautiful thing for the eyes of a child of God to be spiritually opened so we can see God at work in our lives. But too many of us, we live in a state of spiritual slumber. It's actually a condition that Paul recognized with the church at Ephesus when he told them that they just needed to wake up. Wake up. Told them they were living in perilous times. You know, I'm going to grant to say that our times today aren't any less perilous than what theirs were. And so I think we need to agree with Paul here and just say, wake up. Wake up. Somebody asked me why we keep it so cold here today in the sanctuary, and I told them so the people out there would stay awake. Right? Wake up. Now, let me give you a little background about the book of Esther. Mordecai, Esther's uncle, raised her because both of her parents were killed. And so Mordecai raises her like his own daughter. And so he's a stickler, if you will. But she turned out to be a fantastic young lady because of his care for her. But there comes a time in the second chapter of Esther when Mordecai's put to the test. He's put to the test. He's in a predicament that we find in the closing verses of chapter 2. There's these two guys named Bigthan and Teresh, and they're plotting to kill King Xerxes. And Mordecai learns about it. So immediately he has a choice to make. Folks, look at this. There's a battle right there. It's not a battle that he's going to fight with swords. It's not a battle he's going to fight with knives, but it's with the decisions. It's with the words. And in order to do what he needs to do, he's got to overcome his fear, because if he goes and sheds the light on this treason, he could lose his life. Not only would he lose his life, Esther would probably lose hers as well. So he's got a dilemma. What do I do? I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to stand up for God. I'm going to overcome my fear. And I'm going to let King Xerxes know what's going on. And so he did. He overcame the fear of what might happen to him, the unknown. He overcame, and he alerted the king. Now then, in Esther chapter 3, Mordecai has another time that he has to overcome his fear. And this one's even more public and even more costly than the first. I want to read verses 1 through 5 here. Follow with me. Sometime later, King Xerxes promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. Don't you love these names? Over all the other nobles, making him the most powerful official in the empire. All the king's officials would bow down before Haman to show him respect whenever he passed by. So for the king had commanded. But Mordecai refused to bow down or to show him respect. Then the palace officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why are you disobeying the king's command?" They spoke to him day after day, but still he refused to comply with the order. So they spoke to Haman about this to see if he would tolerate Mordecai's conduct, since Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down or show him respect, he was filled with rage. And throughout the book, you'll find that he's trying to get rid of Mordecai. He's trying to kill all the Jews, as a matter of fact. And what ends up happening is he's killed instead. But I want you to think about this for a moment. You see, this is a kind of battle. This is a kind of fear that you and I have to overcome every day. Because, listen, how many of you picked up a gun lately to go to battle? We haven't, have we? We haven't for years. So it's not a battle with guns and things. The greatest battle that we fight is a daily battle of whether we will live for the king or we live for ourselves. Will we choose to remain quiet, protect our lives, protect our security, protect our peace? When we do that, we're living in fear. A man said to me one time about one of our Christian brothers, he said, "I think he's afraid of dying." That's our assessment of many people. But the truth of the matter is that most people are afraid of living. Do you remember, some of you got to really put on your thinking caps here, because we're going back to when you were like 5 years old. Go back to when you were about 5, 6 years old and you were playing games outside. You were playing make-believe, right? You were doing all kinds of things. Listen to me. When we were in those worlds, we weren't taking our medicine and protecting our investments, were we? When you're 5 years old, what are you doing? You took up spears out of sticks and guns you took them up to have fun. We played war. We played war about every day when I was growing up. We had a friend that's got a barn, and we made tunnels through the straw and the hay, and we could be snipers. And it was I still got a scar right here, dent in my forehead from a BB gun. Listen, we rode bikes without helmets. Oh, how dare we? We played ball with no umpires, and we didn't kill each other. Think about it. We got dirty every day. We built castles. We lived in the land of imagination. I recently watched Peter Pan again when I was thinking about this, and I just realized how so many of us as adults have resigned ourselves to being good kids. We're being good boys and girls, right? That's what we got to be if we're an adult. One man was asked what he thought it meant to be a good man as an adult, and he just paused for some time, and then he said this: dutiful. And then he went on to say this: and separated from your heart. Whew. Folks, that's heavy. That is heavy. To think of that and to take it to heart. We got to be, listen, we are adults. We got to be people of duty and responsibility, and I understand that. But I also know that many of us hide behind that because we're scared to death to answer the call that God's put on our heart and our life. And we've got to overcome that fear with the courage of the greatest overcomer who has ever lived, because his Spirit is the one that lives in us. And we have to overcome as he did. Because there are many enemies that'll put fear in your lives every day. And when we give in to those enemies, we stop living. We just stop living. You see, sometimes when you overcome fear and you're standing up for the Lord, not only will you not be noticed, like Mordecai was not noticed for standing up, but somebody else even got honored for that. Somebody else gets credit. So what do? Stand for the Lord anyway. That's what he's called us to do. You see, when Haman went by and everyone was to bow down to him. Now, in case you're wondering, as I was when I was writing, so I wrote this, there's nothing wrong with bowing to another human being. David did it. He bowed to King Saul. Many people bowed to King David. When Abraham wanted to buy a burial plot, he bowed to the people of Heth. There's a lot of other examples in the Bible, too, where people bowed to each other, but there was something more to it. Scriptures don't say this, so let me put the hand up for my opinion and my paraphrase here. Because I believe that just as Pharaoh in Egypt and his officials were considered deity, I believe the king of Persia and his officials were also considered deity. And as a deity, and that's what he was perceived as, then a God-fearing Jew, Mordecai, he wasn't going to comply. Now let me let you in on something that I found to be very fascinating. And that is, when we read the book of Esther and we talk about courage, we immediately go to Esther's courage. But when we think about the two examples of what Mordecai just went through, his is the courage. The example of his courage is what has given Esther her chance to be courageous. She saw her uncle stand up for his belief, stand up for his God, literally. He chose to obey God and never worship a false god, never worship an idol, no matter how much he got pressured. Mordecai set the example, so then Esther follows. Chapter 4, verses 12 to 17. Let's read about Esther. So Hatak gave Esther's message to Mordecai. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther: don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace that you will escape when all other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this." Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, day or night, and my maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. If I must die, I must die." So Mordecai went away and did everything that Esther had ordered him. I think I know where a lot of you are thinking right now. Why in the world, when she's the queen, would she take that kind of risk? She's living in the lap of luxury. Why would she take such a risk? But even more so, why would I? Why would I take such a risk? Why in the world would I ever stir things up? Can I just say that's a good question? That's a really good question. And I think a lot of us think that way. We may not say it out loud. You see, it's things like, my relationships are not what they could or should be, but they're okay. My finances aren't really where I would like them to be, but I've learned to live with it. You see, I have to use foul language when I'm on the job, because if I don't, I'll just stand out. Why indeed? I'm going to tell you, it's because while we've been sleeping, much has been changing. Listen to me. Not changing out there. Changing in here. Changing in our hearts. I've said, and I bet all of you have said the same thing, that the world keeps getting worse and worse. But I'm going to say, read your Bible. The world's always been black with sin. Listen, the world's not getting worse so much as we're getting used to the darkness. Because when we stand in it long enough, our eyes begin to adjust. And that change is happening. It's slow and it's subtle. And if we're not careful, we'll change with it. You've probably heard the illustration of the frog in the boiling water, haven't you? If you take a frog and you put it in a pot of boiling water, he'll jump out immediately because it's hot. But you put that same frog in a pan where you got some cool water, and then you turn the stove on underneath it and you start to heat that water up. You heat it up until it's boiling, you'll cook the frog to death. Because he doesn't see or feel the change that's happening. Hello. That is us. That is us. We fail to see what's been going on around us for a long time. And one day we wake up and think, where'd that come from? How'd that happen? It's been happening. Can I just tell you, Satan has done that to a lot of our lives. He's lulled us into accepting things like counterfeit marriage. You know what counterfeit marriage is? Living together. Living together. Come on. That's what we call it. And you would be surprised at how many Christians consider this a good alternative to marriage. Can I just share something? You have got to overcome fear to go stand at the altar. Ask my wife. She had to overcome fear to come stand beside me. But you got to overcome fear in the kitchen too. And again, I'm going to put her on the spot today. Y'all going to be rounding her up. You got to keep that. You got to have that, to overcome that fear in the kitchen. You got to overcome the fear when you weather the storms. You overcome the fear. Listen to me. Not in the better, but the worse. You overcome the fear not in the riches, but poor. You don't overcome the fear when you're in good health, but it's when you're not in good health. It's when you're sick and helpless and you're unable to contribute. That's when you overcome the fear. When's the last time you spoke up at a meeting at work because they were doing something unethical, illegal? When's the last time you opened up to a good friend about something that you're going through in your life right now and just honestly shared with them? It's time to stand up in that meeting. It's time to stand up with a good friend. Folks, listen, I don't know your battles, but I know if you're following Jesus, then your life is going to have battle after battle after battle. I love what someone once said. If you're following Jesus and you don't run into Satan once in a while, then you got to question whether you're following Jesus. Because if you're not following Jesus and you're going the other way, who are you walking with? Satan will never bother you. You'll never have to worry about a battle if you're walking with him. But if you're walking with God, you will. You're going to have to stand up for Christ in your life. Listen, I'm not talking about church. I'm not talking about theology. I'm talking about the normal, everyday, down in the trenches kind of stuff where you live. And we've got to stand up. And we got to live for the King and not ourselves. So I'm just going to tell you, next time that God gives you an opportunity, stand up. Especially if it's in a public arena. Take a stand, because whether the world pats you on the back or not, no matter how much pressure you get to bow, no matter how fierce the opposition is from your enemies, take the stand and know that God's standing with you. Let me give you very quickly four lessons I think we learned from Esther about overcoming fear. First is this: call your community. Satan loves nothing more than you being by yourself, because he can focus all his energy on you then. But when you got your community together, if it's your small group, your Sunday school class, friends around you, people that are sitting around you this morning, call your community to be with you when you know there's going to be something that you need to stand up for, which is every day, by the way. The second thing that I learned from Esther is this: fast and pray. We do not do that enough. Either one. And you're looking at me and saying, preacher, we'll do it if you do it. Fast and pray. It's amazing what can happen when we do that. And we see what happened with Esther, when not only her and the Jews in the country or the city, but also her maids who probably weren't Jews, they fasted and prayed. And then the next thing we see from Esther right here, take the first step. Take the first step. So many times I believe that God is waiting on us to move. We're sitting there thinking, I'm waiting on God, I'm waiting on God, I'm waiting on God. No, you're not. You're procrastinating. Because God has probably already told you what to do. And we need to just take the first step. Back in the Old Testament, when the Israelites were trying to cross the river is at high tide, is a flood stage is what they call it, and its flood stage is about a 6-foot drop down, but the water's up to the edge and they can't tell it's a 6-foot drop down. And God says, I'm not stopping the waters until the priests take the ark and get in the water. Really? I got to go in there first, and then you'll start. Once you stop the water, then I'll get down. You see, so many times that's where we are. We want God to stop the water so we can see what we need to do, and then we go do it. And God said, no. Step down in there. You take that first step, and then watch what I'll do. Because I just saw your faith. Take that first step. And the last thing I find here with Esther, then I'll go in to see the king, and if I die, I die. Oh my goodness. Here's the hardest step in overcoming fear. Let God deal with the consequences. let God deal with the consequence. Many times we won't try to overcome fear until we know what the outcome is on the other side. Till I know. Well, knowing don't require faith. We got to let God deal with the consequences. Think about Esther's case. She walks in and she says, man, if I got to die, I got to die. But I'm going to do what I know God's called me to do. And she went in before the king. And what happened as a result of the first step that she took? All the Jews in the city and in the country of Persia were saved because of her. Folks, we don't know. We just do not know what effects we will have on other people when we overcome our fears. Not just in the example that we are going to be to other believers, but how might it change the lives of the people that you work with if you stand up in a meeting and question something? You may change the lives of everybody in that room. You may change the direction of the whole company. We don't know what will happen until we take that step, till we move through that fear, and we stand for God. Overcoming fear. Standing up for God whenever, wherever possible. The greatest overcomer, Jesus. We got the same spirit he had. We need to be overcomers as well.